Okay, this video is a bit different because this series will be me reacting to videos usually about how to learn language in 3 months, 6 months, 5 minutes, and criticize it. Which doesn't mean say that it's bad and be mean, but see what they have to say, what is true, what is not, what is good, and what's bad. And try to learn from it what we can take and not just take everything as granted and say, okay, I can learn any language in 6 months because he can. No. Let's see what they have to say.
Well, I've had a question in my mind for many, many years, and that is, how can you speed up learning? Now, this is an interesting question because if you speed up learning, you can spend less time at school. And if you learn really fast, you probably wouldn't have to go to school at all. Now, when I was young, school was sort of okay, but I found quite often that school got in the way of learning. So I had this question in mind: how do you learn faster?
Okay, so first thing, school got in the way of learning. I don't see how. You go to school to learn, and school gives you tools to learn. That's at school where you learn how to speak properly, where you speak properly using conjugation, grammar, and give you a lot more vocab than you actually have when you start going to school. So where you start studying many different subjects. I'm not saying school is perfect, I'm not saying it's the best place, but saying that school goes in the way of learning and so that you may not need to go to school to learn, that's a bit of a stretch.
This is sleep learning, where you get a tape recorder, you put it beside your bed, and it turns on in the middle of the night when you're sleeping, and you're supposed to be learning from this. Good idea. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. But Hypnopedia did open the doors to research in other areas, and we've had incredible discoveries about learning that began with that first question. I went on from there to become passionate about psychology, and I have been involved in psychology in many different ways for the rest of my life up until this point. In 1981, I took myself to China, and I decided that I was going to be native level in Chinese inside 2 years. Now, you need to understand that in 1981, everybody thought Chinese was really, really difficult and that a Westerner could study for 10 years or more and never really get very good at it.
The idea that to learn Chinese you need 10 years or more and that a European can never learn it, that's of course not true. While it is true that learning Chinese is difficult because of its pronunciation, because of its differences with European languages and its written alphabets, which is basically one sign, one word, or one meaning. Of course it is difficult. But once again, if you study it on a daily basis, you can learn it in, of course, less than 10 years.
What was really cool was that in 6 months I was fluent in Mandarin Chinese, and it took a little bit longer to get up to native.
I'm sorry, did you just say that he got fluent in Chinese in 6 months? And got to native level in 9. And that seems really unlikely, because how long does it take for a Chinese person to reach native level, both in, of course, speaking and writing? And I understand, of course, that maybe he went there on holidays or I don't know, but 9 months to reach native level in Chinese. Once again, there's no proof to what he's saying, he's just saying it. That seems unlikely.
Countries struggling terribly with Chinese. I saw Chinese people struggling terribly to learn English and other languages. And so my question got refined down to, how can you help a normal adult learn a new language quickly, easily, and effectively?
Okay, what I like about the way he has the question is first that he's really making a difference for someone to learn his first language, so talking about children, and talking to someone who's learning a second language. And also that he's talking specifically for adults, because the way of learning a language, well, there are different methods, and the methods to teach to a child or to learn for a child are not the same as for an adult. He knows the difference between being a child and being an adult when you're learning, And so he's redefining for someone who already knows one language and who's an adult.
We have massive challenges with environment. We have massive challenges with social dislocation, with wars, all sorts of things going on. And if we can't communicate, we're really going to have difficulty solving these problems. So we need to be able to speak each other's languages. This is really, really important.
When you think about, oh, maybe they don't speak really English in China or in India or maybe in France or, I don't know, other countries, we would also just need to see how the languages are being taught and who's teaching them. When your teachers don't speak it well, they just know the grammar well, then you see why it's difficult for their students to be able to learn that language. But so apparently he's only talking about the method, not the teachers themselves. Just going on the fact that they all learn the same way and it's all wrong.
You look for situations where it's already working, and then you identify the principles and apply them. It's called modeling, and I've been looking at language learning and modeling language learning for about 15 to 20 years now. And my conclusion, my observation from this is that any adult can learn a second language to fluency inside 6 months.
Why, yes, any adult can learn any language. And technically speaking, yes, any adult could learn a language in 6 months. But for that, you would need an incredible amount of studying every day. Which means that for the next 6 months, you're not taking care of your children. You are not spending a lot of time, having fun, going to party, seeing friends, playing video games or whatever. You're not going to work either. You are studying. If you study for 8 hours a day for the next 6 months, then I believe you can learn any language. But who can afford to not work for 6 months and has the motivation to study 8 hours a day, or maybe 9, I don't know exactly, or maybe 7, for 6 months?
It's all about expanding our limits. In 1950, everybody believed that running 1 mile in 4 minutes was impossible. And then Roger Bannister did it in 1956, and from there it's got shorter and shorter. 100 years ago, everybody believed that heavy stuff doesn't fly, except it does, and we all know this.
So he's comparing improvements in terms of physics. We learn new things about physics that allowed us to create machines to do that, to a human body that without any alteration can do something couldn't do before. Comparing the invention of aircraft to being able to learn a language in 6 months. I mean, is there anything in common?
Now, most people, a lot of people, I wouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people think they can't draw. However, there are some key principles, 5 principles that you can apply to learning to draw, and you can actually learn to draw in 5 days. So if you draw like this, you learn these principles for 5 days and apply them, and after 5 days you can draw something like this. Now, I know this is true because that was my first drawing, and after 5 days of applying these principles, that was what I was able to do.
But if you look at his drawing on the 5th day and say, hey, look, now he knows how to draw. That's over it. He doesn't need to learn anything anymore. He knows how to draw. Am I the only one saying that he improved, but saying that he knows how to draw because he did that? That's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? The terms he uses are a bit misleading, I feel like, because first, we don't know how much time he spent drawing that. If he spent 10 minutes a day or 5 hours a day. And I kind of look at that drawing and say, yeah, now he knows how to draw. Definitely. You know what? Just like any artist, he knows how to draw. See the results. No. That is no.
So, anybody can learn to draw in 5 days. And in the same way, with the same logic, anybody can learn a second language in 6 months.
6 months, not one more day, not one less, exactly 6 months. Do you think that is possible? That is always rounded like that? It's really to make you believe 6 months. Because if we start saying, hey, you can be fluent in 74 days, you're like, how much is 74 days? If I say, hey, in 2 weeks, 3 days, and in 5 hours, you can be fluent. It's like, what? Though that would sound more scientific, because things are never round like that.
How? There are 5 principles and 7 actions. There may be a few more, but these are absolutely core. And before I get into those, I just want to talk about 2 myths. I want to dispel 2 myths. The first is that you need talent. People also think that immersion in a new country is the way to learn a language. But look around Hong Kong. Look at all the Westerners who've been here for 10 years who don't speak a word of Chinese. Look at all the Chinese living in America, Britain, Australia, Canada, who've been there 10, 20 years and they don't speak any English. Immersion per se does not work. Why? Because a drowning man cannot learn to swim. When you don't speak a language, you're like a baby, and if you drop yourself into a context which is all adults talking about stuff over your head, you won't learn. So, what are the 5?
Okay, first principle that you don't need talent is true. And that is a good point from this video. Yes, if you have talent, of course it makes it easier. Just like for any skill, if you have talent, it's easier for you to learn it. You'll learn faster. That doesn't mean you cannot learn it without talent. But you don't need immersion. It's not that you need it, but it makes it easier. If you're learning by yourself in a city where no one speaks the language you want to learn, it will usually take more time for you than if you live in a country where they speak the language you want to learn. You will be surrounded by this language all the time. That doesn't mean that you will learn it just without thinking. Of course, you need to want to learn it, but that wouldn't make it easier. If you live together with other families who speak the same language as you, then yes, you will be less surrounded by that new language.
5 principles that you need to pay attention to. First, the 4 words: attention, meaning, relevance, and memory. And these interconnect in very, very important ways, especially when you're talking about learning. Come with me on a journey through a forest. You go on a walk through a forest and you see something like this. Little marks on a tree. Maybe you pay attention, maybe you don't. You go another 50 meters and you see this. You should be paying attention. Another 50 meters, if you haven't been paying attention, you see this. And at this point, you're paying attention. And you've just learned that this is important, it's relevant, because it means this, and anything that is related, any information related to your survival.
Okay, I'm no biologist, I'm no zoologist, but he shows you a picture of a tree that has scratch marks or something. It tells you, you see, you should know that it's a bear, and then you see a bear. And so because you see something before and you see a bear after, then it means necessarily that the two are connected. The scratch marks could be made by any birds or by another animal. Of course, maybe in that case he really took scratch marks that's related to a bear. I'm not saying the contrary. But it's not because A happens and then B happens that A and B are linked. That is one of the logical fallacies that happens so much. In the morning, you drink a Red Bull, and then you go to sports and you do a bad performance. You get a bad grade. Does that mean that the only reason is that you drank Red Bull in the morning, and so that's why? Or could there be anything else related? They're the same. You see the scratch marks, then you see a bear, so the scratch marks have to belong to the bear, as if there was no other animal in the forest beside one bear.
So the first rule, first principle for learning a language is focus on language content that is relevant to you, which brings us to tools. We master tools by using tools, and we learn tools the fastest when they're relevant to us. So let me share a story. A keyboard is a tool. Typing Chinese a certain way, there are methods for this. That's a tool. I had a colleague many years ago who went to night school Tuesday night, Thursday night, 2 hours each time, practicing at home. She spent 9 months and she did not learn to type Chinese. And one night we had a crisis. We had 48 hours to deliver a training manual in Chinese. And she got the job. And I can guarantee you, in 48 hours, she learned to type Chinese because it was relevant, it was meaningful, it was important. She was using a tool to create value.
She'll learn how to type for 9 months. Later, I don't know how he said, like 1 year later or something, there was a crisis and she needed to use these skills. But he considered that the fact that she learned for 9 months, 2 hours a week to type in Chinese have no incidence on when she had 48 hours to type a text in Chinese or a whole manual. He's just considering that she learned something for 9 months, she forgot everything completely, and then relearn it from scratch, and because it was useful, she learned it directly. So if you learn how to ride a bike, you don't ride a bike for 2 months, and then you need to ride a bike because you need to go somewhere, then you have forgotten what you did before, but you learn again and then you remember. I mean, yes, when it's relevant to you, you learn faster. Because it has meaning, it is useful. And so your brain, takes the information that he needs. And knowing something that you used previously that you may need again, he will keep it. If you learn something completely useless, unrelated, he may not remember it.
Use your language as a tool to communicate right from day one, as a kid does. When I first arrived in China, I didn't speak a word of Chinese, and on my second week I got to take a train ride overnight. I spent 8 hours sitting in the dining car talking to one of the guards on the train. He took an interest in me for some reason, and we just chatted all night in Chinese, and he was drawing pictures and making movements with his hands and facial expressions, and piece by piece by piece I understood more and more. But what was really cool was 2 weeks later, when people were talking Chinese around me, I was understanding some of this, and I hadn't even made any effort to learn that.
Wait, so he spent the night in the train. A Chinese person talks to him fully in Chinese. So you don't know anything about the pronunciation, the writing, the words, the grammar, nothing, okay? And so he talks to you, he makes gesture, and you understand. So if I make the gesture of a man walking, you understand I'm talking about someone walking. But I'm not sure you're understanding the gesture I'm making. And knowing how difficult Chinese is in terms of pronunciation, telling me that you hear someone say something, you see him gesture something, you already understand the words, understand the meaning, you remember it, and so the next time he uses the same words, you understand what it means. And not just for one word, but for the whole thing, because you have no previous knowledge of Chinese. I don't know who can do that. I don't know who can go to a country, not speak a single word, someone talks to them in that language, and just by making gestures you understand the language, not the gestures, and you remember it, knowing that once again the pronunciation is completely different from English, which is the language he speaks.
When you first understand the message, then you will acquire the language unconsciously. And this is really, really well documented now. It's something called comprehensible input. There's 20 or 30 years of research on this. Stephen Krashen, a leader in the field, has published all sorts of these different studies. And language learning is not about accumulating lots of knowledge. In many, many ways, it's about physiological training. A woman I know from Taiwan did great in English at school. She got A grades all the way through, went through college, A grades, went to the US, and found she couldn't understand what people were saying. And people started asking her, "Are you deaf?" And she was English deaf. Because we have filters in our brain that filter in the sounds that we are familiar with, and they filter out the sounds of languages that we're not. And if you can't hear it, you won't understand it. If you can't understand it, you're not going to learn it.
So, she was English deaf. She could not hear the sounds because these were not from her native language, even after studying for many years. And so he, who did only speak English, went to China, where they have sounds that don't exist in English, but he was not Chinese deaf. Because he said he did not study before, so he talked about his night train conversations. So after just 1 week in spending in China, he was already not Chinese deaf anymore, or he was never. But that girl, the Chinese girl who studied English for many years, was English deaf. How it is so good that he's not Chinese deaf, but all the students are English deaf?
So, you've got 43 muscles in your face. You have to coordinate those in a way that you make sounds that other people will understand. If you've ever done a new sport for a couple of days and you know how your body feels, hurts, if your face is hurting, you're doing it right.
If your face hurts, you're doing it right. So, anyone who's not an English native speaker and who can speak English fluently now had at some point his face hurts because he was learning English. So he's going to tell us now that his face hurt when he was speaking Chinese because he never used the muscles to make Chinese sounds.
And the final principle is state, psychophysiological state. If you're sad, angry, worried, upset, you're not going to learn, period. If you're happy, relaxed, in an alpha brain state, curious, you're going to learn really quickly. And very specifically, you need to be tolerant of ambiguity.
Okay, just to pause 1 second. The part about the state is true. But I think we just all know it. When you're angry, you're not studying. When you're sad, you're not studying just because you don't want to. And also because if you do, you know it's not going to be efficient because you're not in a good state. So, while it's true, I think most of us know it. We don't want to practice because we know it's not going to be good if we're not in a good state. Though, once again, sometimes it's better to study even if you're in bad moods, just for a bit, rather than not study at all. It's not efficient, but if it means you're not going to study for many days because something bad happened in your life, it's better to keep it going. Even if you're sad or angry, just keep it a little bit so that you don't forget it, so that it stays with you. It's better to do it even just a tiny bit, even if you're not in a good state, and maybe spend more time when you are.
Set all the time because you're not perfect. If you're comfortable with getting some, not getting some, just paying attention to what you do understand, you're going to be fine, you'll be relaxed, and you'll learn quickly.
And that is true. You cannot understand everything, you won't understand everything for a very long time. Even sometimes when you're fluent, you may watch a movie, listen to a song and not understand every single part. You may not understand a few words, a few expressions, etc. And that is okay, that is normal, depending once again on your goal, but that is normal. And so when you're learning, once you're beginner level, intermediate level, if you try to understand every single word, you're going to go crazy. So in that case, yes, it's better to think, okay, I got these words, that's good, and try to focus on what you got rather than what you did not get, because once again it's being positive or negative more than anything. So yeah, in that part I agree.
So based on those 5 principles, what are the 7 actions that you take? Number 1, listen a lot. I call it brain soaking. You put yourself in a context where you're hearing tons and tons and tons of the language, and it doesn't matter if you understand it or not. You're listening to the rhythms, you're listening to patterns that repeat, you're listening to things that stand out. So just soak your brain in this.
So could we, hypothetically, put together brain soaking and immersion per se? Because immersion is when you're surrounded by the language, you hear it all the time. And his rule number 1 is listen to the language all the time if you can. So that's basically, you don't need to go to the country to immerse yourself, but one of the rules to learn a language quickly is to immerse yourself. The
second action is you get the meaning first, even before you get the words. You go, well, how do I do that? I don't know the words. Well, you understand what these different postures mean. Human communication is body language in many, many ways. So much body language. From body language, you can understand a lot of communication. Therefore, you're understanding, you're acquiring some comprehensible input. The third action, start mixing. If you've got 10 verbs, 10 nouns, and 10 adjectives, you can say 1,000 different things. Right? Language is a creative process. What do babies do? Okay, me, ba, now. Okay, that's how they communicate. So start mixing, get creative, have fun with it. It doesn't have to be perfect, just has to work.
Yeah, so the rule number 3, I think, be creative. I mean, it's just another way to say practice. How do you remember words? By practicing, by using them in sentences. And yes, having 10 verbs and 10 nouns and 10 adjectives can make you a lot of different sentences. Sometimes the sentences don't make sense. So, I mean, thing is, if I say the blue cherry jumps, I'm using a noun, a verb, and an adjective. But we are remember by making a sentence like that. You can make a lot of sentences that don't make sense, but he just said before, use something that's relevant to you, something that is meaningful. You can make a lot of sentences that are not meaningful with the vocab that you have. And so if you don't make something meaningful, as he said the opposite, then that means that you will not learn a language correctly or easily. So once again, I see some contradiction in what he says between make something meaningful and you can make a lot of sentences, but most likely a lot of them are not going to be meaningful, so that's actually not that helpful. It's just a big number. You see, like 10, 10, 10, 1,000. Isn't that great? You can make 1,000 sentences. Let's go make 1,000 sentences to practice.
Well, with every language there's high frequency content. In English, 1,000 words covers 85% of anything you're ever going to say in daily communication. 3,000 words gives you 98% of anything you're going to say in daily conversation. Start with your toolbox. Week number 1. In your new language, you say things like, how do you say that? I don't understand. Repeat that, please. What does that mean? By week 2, you should be saying things like me, this, you, that, give. 3rd or 4th week, you're getting into what they call glue words. Although, but, therefore, you should get yourself a language parent. There are 4 rules of a language parent. Spouses, by the way, are not very good at this, okay? But the 4 rules are, first of all, they will work hard to understand what you mean, even when you're way off beat. Secondly, they will never correct your mistakes. Thirdly, they will feed back their understanding of what you're saying so that you can respond appropriately and get that feedback. And then they will use words that you know.
They try to understand you, okay? They do not correct your mistakes. You're going to keep making some mistakes then, aren't you? They show that they understand by using correct language. Yeah, the answer to you in using the correct language. Once again, for basic words, for basic verbs, basic vocabulary, yes. But for some verbs that are used every day in the 85% that you use, there are verbs that are really similar one to another. And the way to make the difference is not doable just by mimicking or showing. You really need to explain it. And so if that person talks to you only in the target language, you'll never get the meaning or the difference between the 2 verbs.
Just copy the face. You've got to get the muscles working right so you can sound in a way that people will understand you. You need to hear how it feels and feel how it sounds, which means you have a feedback loop operating in your face. But ideally, if you can look at a native speaker and just observe how they use their face, let your unconscious mind absorb the rules.
Sing, song, king, sung, hung.
And the final...
Once again, talking about copying or mimicking the way people work by looking at them. There's a lot of sounds that are made at the back of the throat. A lot of sounds that are made by closing the mouth. If I close the mouth, you don't see what I'm doing inside my mouth. Or if it's in the back, you may not see it as well. And if you're language deaf or English deaf, as you said, you don't hear the sounds. So I don't hear the sound, I do not necessarily see everything that happens in your mouth, but I'm supposed to copy it. How? I have some students who struggle because there are sounds in French that are really similar, they don't see the difference and they don't hear it. And there are sounds that you can make making exactly the same face. And when native speakers speak, they do not go to trouble of articulating very well. So if you follow them, you may not be able to make it like them or to hear the difference when you make it. And if that teacher doesn't correct you on the pronunciation, I don't see how you can at some point learn.
The final action you need to take is something that I call direct connect. What does this mean? Well, most people learning a second language sort of take mother tongue words and the target words and go over them again and again in their mind to try and remember them. Really inefficient. What you need to do is realize that everything you know is an image inside your mind, it's feelings. If you talk about fire, you can smell the smoke, you can hear the crackling, you can see the flames. So what you do is you go into that imagery and all of that memory and you come out with another pathway. So I call it same box, different path. You come out that pathway and you build it over time. You become more and more skilled at just connecting the new sound to those images that you already have and to that internal representation. There are 5 principles that you need to work with, 7 actions. If you do any of them, you're going to improve. And remember, these are things under your control as a learner. Do them all. You're going to be fluent in the second language in 6 months. Thank you.
Alright, so pay attention. If you see some pattern, it has to be right. You cannot be wrong, apparently. So to learn grammar, that should be really easy. Try to imitate the people who are speaking. And if you cannot hear it, he doesn't say how to change it. He just says it's physiological. So there's still no explanation how you're supposed to stop being English deaf. You should learn basic sentences which just help you so far as, beginner. Like, how do you say that? What is that? Can you repeat that? If I say something you don't understand, and you just say, can you repeat, and I just say it again, and you still don't understand. Yeah, you know how to say, can you repeat it, but that's all. You still don't understand. You need a parent's language parents. Of course, he doesn't say how much you need to work every day or every week. He doesn't say if you need to go to the country where they speak or not. He said no, apparently, because that's not what you need. So if you follow this rule and study 20 minutes every day, there is no way that you can learn a language in 6 months. I can't, you can't, and he can't if you just study 20 minutes a day. Even if you follow all the principles, you will need much more than that. And of course, once again, he talks about 6 months, he talks about a lot of numbers. You can make 1,000 sentences. Yeah, great. But so if you practice the same 10 words, 10 nouns, 10 verbs, and 10 adjectives for a week, then it's going to take you a long time to reach, to know the 85% words that you need in 6 months. And depending how much time you spend studying every day, you won't. So he's just forgetting the biggest part of how to learn language quickly, which is how much time you need to spend every day or on an average to speak that language. And of course, we don't even talk about the fact that he says you need to be able to hear it, but if you can hear it, then you can't hear it. But he doesn't say how to change that. So good luck. If you're language deaf or English deaf, then sorry. I can believe that this video has, it's a TED Talk when he says that, and people are like, yeah, thank you. He gives hints. Some of them are good, some of them are bad about learning a language. But he still assures you that you can learn a language in 6 months because you can learn how to draw in 5 days. Because 50 years ago, nobody thought we could fly. Does it make sense?